Every culture creates a set of invisible rules that guide how people behave, think, and respond to authority. These rules are rarely spoken directly, yet they shape almost every decision you make, from how you speak to elders to whether you question what is taught in school. This silent framework is powerful because it is presented as natural. When you grow up inside a system that rewards obedience and discourages dissent, you do not see the boundaries that are quietly built around your mind. You assume they are part of life itself. This is where compliance begins to take root, not as a choice but as an instinct. Compliance is more than just following orders. It is the internalization of expectations set by family, community, and wider society. From the moment you first understand praise and punishment, you learn that harmony comes from doing what is expected, and silence often feels safer than challenge. Over time, this conditioning creates adults who follow laws, traditions, and even unjust social norms without hesitation. When cultural rules are deeply ingrained, people rarely ask who benefits from them or why they exist. This absence of questioning is not accidental. It is the result of a psychological design that favors stability over critical thinking. Critical thinking requires discomfort. It asks you to doubt what others accept, to examine truths that have been handed to you without evidence, and to risk social isolation for the sake of personal understanding. In contrast, compliance offers comfort. It protects you from conflict and provides belonging. This tension between safety and truth is exploited in every culture to maintain order. Psychological studies, such as the classic obedience experiments by Stanley Milgram, reveal just how powerful this conditioning can be. In Milgram's research, participants followed instructions to harm others because an authority figure told them to, even when their conscience urged them to stop. The results shocked the world and continue to remind us how easily normal people obey, even when morality is at stake. The same pattern appears in modern life. In workplaces, employees are rewarded for fitting into company culture, even when policies feel unfair. In schools, students are praised for memorizing facts, but discouraged from challenging the curriculum. In communities, silence is often mistaken for respect, and questioning tradition is viewed as rebellion. This quiet training produces generations who rarely examine the systems they live under. What begins as small acts of compliance grows into a lifelong habit of obedience. Dark psychology studies these hidden mechanisms, not to encourage manipulation, but to reveal it. The term describes how psychological principles can be used to control behavior, often without the target's awareness. Cultural compliance is one of the most effective forms of this control. When you conform because it feels natural, those who hold power do not need to force you. The compliance has already been planted deep inside your beliefs. The most unsettling part is how subtle this process can be. You may believe your choices are independent, yet many of them were shaped long before you were capable of questioning them. Cultural narratives about success, morality, gender roles, and loyalty influence what you consider right or wrong. When these narratives are left unexamined, they serve those who created them rather than the individuals who follow them. This is why understanding the hidden mechanisms behind cultural obedience is essential. It is not about rejecting culture or tradition entirely, but about recognizing where control ends and autonomy begins. Without this awareness, people can live their entire lives mistaking compliance for morality and obedience for virtue, never realizing they surrendered their critical thinking long ago. The earliest lessons in compliance begin long before you can name them. From the first moments of childhood, culture embeds a quiet message into the routines of family, school, and community life. That message is simple, yet powerful. To belong, you must obey. This teaching is rarely stated directly. It is reinforced through smiles when you conform, scolding when you resist, and subtle signals that guide you toward behaviors approved by those around you. Over time, this forms the foundation of how you view the world and yourself. Children are not born with a natural understanding of right and wrong. They learn morality through observation and imitation, absorbing the patterns of those they trust. cultural norms, use this vulnerability to shape thought from the very start. The approval of parents and teachers teaches children that silence in the face of rules is safer than asking why the rules exist. Reward and punishment cycles condition a preference for obedience. Psychologists like Erik Erikson describe early childhood as a period where trust and autonomy are in delicate balance. When autonomy is discouraged, children grow into adults who fear questioning authority because it feels unsafe. This process is not accidental. It is an efficient way to maintain order. Families teach respect for elders, without explaining why age should equal unquestioned authority. Schools enforce rules about behavior, dress, and speech that prepare children to follow future workplace hierarchies. Religious teachings often emphasize obedience to higher powers, presenting compliance as a moral duty rather than an option. Each layer of life reinforces the same principle: harmony is achieved when you conform to expectations. Critical thinking, by contrast, is rarely celebrated in these formative years. A child who asks too many questions may be labeled defiant or difficult. In classrooms, those who challenge established facts or question the fairness of rules are often silenced, rather than guided toward deeper understanding. This pattern teaches children that intellectual safety lies in agreement, not in inquiry. The seeds of conformity take root quietly, and by adulthood, they feel like natural instincts rather than learned behaviors. Research in social psychology supports this observation. Studies on conformity, such as those conducted by Solomon Asch, show that even adults struggle to resist group pressure, often doubting their own perception when it conflicts with the majority. When this behavior begins in childhood, its influence becomes even stronger. The ability to critically analyze cultural messages weakens with repetition, making it difficult to separate personal belief from inherited expectation. The cultural lie implanted in childhood is convincing because it offers security. Compliance provides belonging. Questioning feels dangerous because it threatens that belonging. As a result, many people never pause to consider whether their moral compass is their own, or simply a reflection of the environment that shaped them. They live under the quiet weight of inherited rules, mistaking them for personal convictions. Understanding this early conditioning is crucial for anyone who wants to reclaim their capacity for critical thinking. Without identifying where cultural obedience begins, it is impossible to see how deeply it has influenced decisions, relationships, and self-identity. The first step toward awareness is not rebellion, but recognition of how thoroughly the lessons of compliance have been woven into the earliest stages of life, guiding behavior long before conscious choice is possible. Compliance exists not only because culture enforces it, but because it served an evolutionary purpose for human survival. Long before organized societies, human groups relied on unity to face threats from nature and rival tribes. Individuals who obeyed the group's decisions, even when they personally disagreed, stood a greater chance of staying alive. Over generations, this tendency became embedded in human behavior. It is not surprising that even in modern settings, people often follow the majority rather than risk isolation. Social psychologists describe this as a basic survival mechanism. When you feel uncertain or afraid, you look to others for guidance. If the group moves in one direction, you instinctively follow. This instinct helps maintain cohesion, but sacrifices independent thought. In experiments like Solomon Asch's famous line judgment study, individuals conform to an obviously incorrect answer simply because everyone else in the group agreed on it. The discomfort of standing alone outweighed the evidence of their own eyes. This demonstrates how deeply rooted the need for belonging is in human psychology. Obedience to authority also reflects this survival instinct. In Stanley Milgram's experiments, participants followed instructions to administer painful electric shocks to others, despite personal discomfort. The authority figure's presence created a psychological frame where defiance felt more dangerous than compliance. These results shocked the public because they revealed a disturbing truth. Ordinary people will harm others when guided by authority, even when no direct threat to themselves exists. This phenomenon extends beyond laboratories into history, where atrocities were carried out not by monstrous individuals, but by ordinary citizens obeying orders. The connection between survival and compliance can also be seen in everyday environments. In workplaces, employees rarely challenge unethical policies because doing so threatens their livelihood and social standing. In schools, students conform to peer behavior to avoid ridicule. Even within families, silence often feels safer than speaking against tradition. In each case, compliance reduces immediate conflict, even if it creates long-term harm to personal integrity or moral clarity. Dark psychology studies exploit this instinct by identifying ways to manipulate it. Cultural leaders, advertisers, and political figures understand that people will follow patterns set by the group or authority, particularly under stress. By framing certain behaviors as necessary for safety or belonging, they create compliance without coercion. The individual believes they are making a free choice, unaware that their instincts are being directed. Recognizing compliance as a survival tool helps explain why it feels natural and difficult to resist. The discomfort of questioning authority is not weakness, but an echo of ancient instincts designed to protect you from isolation and danger. The challenge in modern life is distinguishing when this instinct serves you and when it is used to control you. Without that awareness, people can mistake obedience for morality and conformity for truth, living quietly within structures they never consciously chose. Morality is often presented as absolute, yet history shows it is deeply shaped by culture. What one society condemns as wrong, another may celebrate as virtue. This difference is not random. It reflects the values and priorities of the culture in which people are raised. From childhood onward, individuals are taught that their cultural morality is universal truth. Few are encouraged to consider that moral codes are human constructions, influenced by power, tradition, and survival needs rather than fixed laws of nature. Philosophy has long examined this paradox. Friedrich Nietzsche described herd morality, where the collective defines good and evil based on what preserves the group, not what is inherently just. Michel Foucault explored how power shapes knowledge, arguing that those in control determine what is considered normal and acceptable. Together, these insights reveal a pattern. Morality often reflects the interests of those who hold authority, rather than an objective standard of right and wrong. Dark psychology applies this understanding to show how morality can be weaponized. When a culture labels obedience as virtue and dissent as immorality, questioning authority becomes socially dangerous. Individuals comply, not because they truly believe, but because disobedience carries the threat of rejection or punishment. This dynamic allows those in power to maintain control without force, as cultural narratives do the work for them. Research in moral psychology supports these observations. Studies show that people justify actions based on cultural norms, even when those actions conflict with universal ethical principles. For example, practices like honor-based violence or ritualized punishment are condemned in some societies yet accepted in others, not because they are objectively right, but because they align with local moral frameworks. This demonstrates how easily morality can be shaped by collective agreement rather than critical reasoning. In modern life, this framing is visible in subtle ways. Corporations promote loyalty as a moral value, expecting employees to sacrifice personal well-being for organizational goals. Nations frame obedience to law as patriotism, discouraging citizens from questioning policies. Religious institutions present adherence to doctrine as a path to virtue, often warning of dire consequences for doubt. Each system embeds morality into compliance, creating a cycle where questioning feels like betrayal rather than thoughtful evaluation. Critical thinking disrupts this cycle by separating personal ethics from cultural conditioning. It asks difficult questions. Does following a rule make it right? Who benefits from this moral standard? Why is dissent treated as dangerous? These questions are uncomfortable because they challenge the foundations of identity. Yet without them, Individuals cannot distinguish between morality that serves humanity and morality that serves control. Understanding how culture frames morality and truth is essential for anyone seeking genuine autonomy. It reveals that what feels unquestionably right may only reflect the dominant narrative of the time and place. Without this awareness, people risk living their entire lives, guided by moral codes they never examined, mistaking cultural obedience for universal truth. Every major institution in society is built upon structured hierarchies that depend on obedience to function. Schools, governments, corporations, and religious organizations rely on the predictable behavior of their members to maintain order and achieve their goals. This predictability comes from a culture of compliance that is carefully cultivated through rules, traditions, and authority figures. These systems reward those who conform and marginalize those who resist, creating a psychological environment where questioning the status quo feels unsafe or even dangerous. Schools are often the first institution where individuals experience formal obedience training. From early childhood, students are taught to raise their hands for permission to speak, line up quietly, and accept the authority of teachers without challenge. While these rules create order in classrooms, they also condition children to associate compliance with approval and dissent with punishment. The lessons extend far beyond academics, preparing students to transition seamlessly into workplaces that demand similar forms of obedience to supervisors and corporate culture. Religious institutions also play a significant role in fostering compliance. Many doctrines frame obedience to divine authority as a moral duty, often linking disobedience to severe consequences, both spiritual and social. This framing reinforces conformity, not only to religious laws but also to the community that enforces them. The psychological effect is powerful. When obedience is tied to eternal reward or punishment, it becomes deeply ingrained in personal identity and behavior. Governments utilize similar tactics, but on a broader scale. National laws, patriotic narratives, and public rituals create a shared sense of duty to the state. Citizens are encouraged to view compliance as a virtue, while dissent is portrayed as unpatriotic or harmful to social harmony. Propaganda, both historical and modern, leverages fear and loyalty to ensure adherence to government policies. The result is a population that rarely questions authority, even when policies conflict with personal ethics. Workplaces continue this cycle with their own structures of control. Corporate policies dictate acceptable behavior, dress codes and communication styles. Hierarchical chains of command establish clear lines of authority, while performance reviews and promotions reward conformity. Employees quickly learn that challenging unethical practices can lead to isolation or job loss, while silent compliance ensures security. Over time, this fosters a culture where critical thinking is suppressed in favor of efficiency and loyalty. The psychological principles behind these institutions overlap. Authority bias leads individuals to trust those in power simply because of their status. Social proof encourages conformity when people see others obeying the same rules. Fear of exclusion or punishment prevents rebellion even when individuals privately disagree with the system. These forces combine to create environments where compliance feels rational, even when it compromises personal values. Dark psychology examines these systems to reveal how control is maintained without overt coercion. When institutions align moral duty with obedience, they create a self-reinforcing cycle. People obey because they believe it is right, and they believe it is right because everyone else obeys. This circular logic ensures stability, but also enables abuse of power, as dissent is silenced under the guise of preserving harmony. Recognizing the role of institutional systems in shaping behavior is essential for understanding why compliance persists across generations. It is not merely an individual choice, but a deeply embedded cultural expectation supported by every major structure in society. Without awareness of these dynamics, individuals may unknowingly participate in systems that prioritize control over truth, sacrificing critical thinking for the comfort of belonging. Human beings are wired for connection, and this need for belonging is one of the most powerful forces driving compliance. Social pressure operates quietly but effectively, shaping behavior without the need for explicit rules. From early childhood, individuals learn that acceptance brings comfort, while exclusion brings pain. This fear of being cast out or ridiculed is often stronger than the desire to pursue personal truth. In many cultures, the threat of social isolation is enough to ensure obedience, even when no physical punishment is present. Psychological studies confirm this dynamic. The conformity experiments conducted by Solomon Asch demonstrated that individuals will often agree with a group's incorrect judgment, rather than face the discomfort of standing alone. This effect is magnified when the group is larger or when the individual feels uncertain. Peer pressure is not limited to adolescence. It persists into adulthood, influencing decisions at work, in communities, and within families. The silent message is consistent. To question the group is to risk becoming an outsider. This fear is particularly potent in collectivist cultures, where identity is tied to group membership. In these societies, personal beliefs are secondary to maintaining harmony within the family or community. Questioning established norms is viewed not just as personal rebellion, but as a threat to the collective order. Even in individualist cultures, however, social exclusion carries significant emotional urge. Humans evolved to survive in groups, and the brain interprets social rejection in ways similar to physical pain. This biological response makes the pressure to conform almost irresistible. Dark psychology uses this insight to understand how compliance is maintained through subtle cues, rather than overt commands. Silence from others can be as powerful as direct criticism. A glance of disapproval, a withheld invitation, or quiet gossip can signal to someone that they are straying from acceptable behavior. Over time, these signals teach individuals to self-regulate, aligning their actions with the group even without explicit instruction. Social media amplifies this dynamic in modern life. Approval is measured in likes and shares, while disapproval spreads through public shaming and viral outrage. This creates a heightened awareness of group opinion, pressuring individuals to conform to trends, ideologies, or movements, without fully examining their validity. The fear of being digitally excluded or labeled can drive rapid shifts in behavior, often at the expense of critical thinking. The consequences of this fear are profound. When people prioritize acceptance over truth, they suppress personal convictions, avoid honest conversations, and participate in actions they privately question. This creates a cycle where conformity appears unanimous, even when silent dissent exists. The illusion of agreement strengthens the pressure to comply, further silencing individual thought. Understanding the role of social pressure and fear of exclusion is vital for breaking this cycle. Awareness of these forces allows individuals to recognize when their choices are shaped by belonging rather than belief. Without this awareness, people may continue to follow cultural expectations, mistaking the comfort of inclusion for the correctness of conformity. Obedience that goes unchallenged carries psychological costs that often remain hidden until much later in life. When individuals comply with cultural expectations without examining their origin or purpose, they may unknowingly sacrifice their personal values and internal moral compass. This slow erosion of independent thought does not happen suddenly. It builds over years of silent agreement, reinforced by family, education, and societal structures that reward loyalty while discouraging dissent. One of the most significant costs is the suppression of critical thinking. When people are trained to follow rules rather than question them, they lose the ability to evaluate situations objectively. Decisions become automatic, guided by what is expected rather than what is right or logical. Over time, this leads to a narrowing of perspective, where individuals accept narratives presented by authority without seeking alternative explanations. This diminished ability to analyze information leaves people vulnerable to manipulation, whether by leaders, institutions, or cultural trends. There are also emotional consequences. Constant compliance can create an internal conflict between what an individual feels and what they are expected to display. When personal beliefs clash with societal demands, people may experience guilt or shame for even thinking differently. This emotional tension can manifest as anxiety, depression, or chronic stress. In extreme cases, individuals may develop a form of learned helplessness, believing that questioning authority is futile and that their actions cannot alter their circumstances. Social relationships are also affected. Obedience often maintains harmony on the surface, but it can create distance between individuals and their authentic selves. When people suppress their true thoughts to avoid conflict, connections become shallow and based on performance rather than honesty. This lack of authenticity can erode trust, leaving individuals feeling isolated despite appearing socially integrated. Over time, this quiet disconnection contributes to a sense of emptiness that no amount of cultural approval can resolve. History provides numerous examples of the dangers of unquestioned obedience. Atrocities committed during times of war, mass discrimination, and systemic injustice often relied on ordinary individuals following orders without hesitation. These events reveal a disturbing truth. It is not only the corrupt few who create harm, but the many who comply silently. Psychological research into these events consistently shows that people often obey not because they are inherently cruel, but because they feel bound by duty, fear, or social expectation. In modern settings, the same patterns appear on smaller scales. Employees remain silent about unethical practices to keep their jobs. Citizens accept policies they privately oppose because they fear being labeled disloyal. Families perpetuate harmful traditions because questioning them would disrupt generational bonds. In each case, the cost of obedience is borne by individuals who compromise their integrity for the sake of belonging. Recognizing this cost is essential for anyone seeking to reclaim autonomy. Compliance may bring short-term comfort, but it often leads to long-term dissatisfaction and moral fatigue. Without critical thinking, people risk living lives shaped entirely by external expectations rather than personal convictions. The hidden price of unquestioned obedience is not just the loss of freedom, but the quiet surrender of one's ability to choose truth over convenience. Escaping the grip of cultural conditioning begins with awareness, yet awareness alone is rarely enough. The systems that teach compliance are designed to feel natural, so questioning them can trigger discomfort and even fear. This resistance is psychological. When beliefs you have carried since childhood are challenged, the mind reacts defensively, as though part of your identity is under threat. Breaking through requires patience, deliberate effort, and the willingness to confront long-held assumptions that once felt unquestionable. The first step is to recognize the patterns that shape your behavior. Many individuals follow routines, traditions, and moral codes without asking why they exist. By observing moments when you conform out of habit rather than conviction, you begin to see where cultural influence overrides personal judgment. This observation must be done without immediate judgment of yourself. The goal is not to condemn obedience entirely, but to distinguish between conscious choices and inherited behaviors. Psychological research highlights the difficulty of this process. Cognitive dissonance, the tension experienced when beliefs conflict with actions, often arises during awakening. People may feel torn between the security of familiar norms and the unsettling freedom of independent thought. This tension can lead to denial or rationalization, where individuals cling to cultural narratives even as evidence contradicts them. Overcoming this barrier requires persistence and the courage to tolerate uncertainty. History shows that breakthroughs are possible. Figures who questioned dominant cultural beliefs, from social reformers to whistleblowers, often endured isolation before their insights were recognized. Their journeys illustrate a universal truth. Growth in critical thinking often demands short-term discomfort for long-term clarity. By examining why obedience feels safe and why questioning feels dangerous, individuals uncover the subtle ways culture molds perception and behavior. Practical steps can support this process. Seeking diverse perspectives broadens understanding and challenges ingrained assumptions. engaging with philosophy and psychology provides tools to analyze cultural influences objectively. Practicing self-inquiry helps clarify which values are truly personal and which were imposed. These strategies are not about rejecting every cultural norm, but about reclaiming the power to choose consciously rather than follow blindly. Dark psychology provides insight into why this awakening is so difficult. Those who benefit from compliance often use fear, shame, or social incentives to discourage independent thought. Recognizing these tactics is liberating. Once you see how narratives are constructed to maintain control, their power begins to weaken. Awareness transforms manipulation into understanding, allowing you to navigate culture without being dominated by it. Breaking through cultural conditioning does not mean abandoning your community or traditions. It means engaging with them from a position choice rather than obligation. It allows you to maintain connections while holding space for independent thought. Without this shift, individuals risk living lives dictated by invisible expectations, mistaking silence for peace and obedience for virtue. Once individuals begin to recognize how cultural conditioning has shaped their beliefs and actions, the next challenge is rebuilding critical thinking skills that may have been suppressed for years. This process requires deliberate practice, as critical thinking does not emerge automatically once compliance is identified. It must be developed through consistent questioning, analysis, and the willingness to evaluate ideas without fear of social disapproval. Critical thinking begins with curiosity. Instead of accepting information at face value, you learn to ask how conclusions are formed, who benefits from them, and what evidence supports them. This approach slows down automatic responses and replaces them with measured evaluation. It is not about rejecting authority outright, but about ensuring that every belief and decision passes through your own reasoning process, rather than being absorbed without examination. Modern psychology supports this approach through studies on metacognition, the ability to think about your own thinking. When individuals analyze how they form judgments, they identify cognitive biases such as authority bias or groupthink that previously guided them unconsciously. Awareness of these biases reduces their influence, allowing decisions to be based on evidence rather than social pressure or habit. Rebuilding critical thinking also involves exposure to diverse perspectives. Cultures often create echo chambers where only certain ideas are repeated and reinforced. Actively seeking viewpoints that challenge your assumptions helps prevent intellectual stagnation. Engaging with philosophy, history, and cross-cultural research provides a broader context for evaluating moral and social norms. By comparing different frameworks, you begin to see that what feels natural or right in one culture may appear arbitrary or even harmful in another. Practical techniques strengthen this skill over time. Journaling thoughts, debating respectfully with others, and analyzing media for persuasion tactics all train the mind to detect manipulation. Questioning narratives in news, advertising, or political messaging builds resilience against subtle forms of influence. As these skills develop, you gain confidence in making decisions based on reason rather than reflexive obedience. The transition from compliance to critical thinking is rarely smooth. It often creates tension with peers, family, or institutions that expect unquestioned loyalty. Yet this discomfort signals growth. Developing an independent perspective may initially isolate you, but it also lays the foundation for authentic relationships built on honesty rather than silent conformity. Dark psychology warns that systems of control adapt when individuals begin to think critically. Institutions may respond by intensifying propaganda or framing dissent as dangerous. Recognizing these tactics prepares you to navigate resistance without falling back into compliance. Over time, the ability to question and analyze strengthens not only personal autonomy, but also collective resilience. In a world where cultural pressures remain constant, critical thinking acts as a safeguard against manipulation. It transforms obedience into conscious choice and replaces inherited beliefs with reasoned understanding. Without it, individuals remain vulnerable to forces that prioritize control over truth. living quietly under the weight of expectations they never chose to carry. Reaching the point where you understand the mechanisms of cultural compliance and recognize how deeply they influence thought and behavior creates a critical moment of decision. At this stage, individuals must choose between the comfort of continuing within familiar structures and the uncertainty of stepping into awareness. This choice is not abstract. It shapes daily actions, relationships, and the way you interpret morality itself. Remaining in compliance provides immediate security. It allows you to move through life with minimal friction, accepted by peers and supported by institutions. Rules are followed without question, and moral decisions feel straightforward because they align with what everyone else believes. However, this comfort carries a hidden cost. The absence of questioning creates a dependence on external authority, leaving individuals vulnerable to manipulation whenever those in power decide what is right or wrong. Awareness offers a different path. It does not promise ease. It requires the willingness to live with uncertainty and the courage to confront uncomfortable truths. Critical thinking invites you to examine cultural narratives rather than accept them blindly. It challenges you to identify when loyalty serves justice and when it serves control. This process often leads to conflict, both internal and external, as it disrupts long-standing habits of obedience and calls attention to structures many prefer to ignore. Dark psychology demonstrates why this awareness is rare. Cultural systems are designed to reward compliance and punish dissent. Social approval, job security, and even personal identity are often tied to following unspoken rules. Choosing awareness means accepting the possibility of isolation and misunderstanding, yet it also opens the door to authenticity and moral clarity, allowing individuals to act based on values they have consciously chosen, rather than inherited scripts. History is filled with individuals who faced this choice and chose awareness. Reformers, innovators, and quiet dissenters alike endured resistance to challenge unjust systems. Their courage often inspired change long after their struggles ended. This illustrates a profound truth about human growth. Transformation rarely begins with comfort. It begins with the decision to see what others overlook, to question what others accept, and to stand firm, even when standing alone. As this exploration closes, the question remains for you. Will you choose the safety of silent obedience, or the challenge of conscious thought? The answer is not given here. It belongs to you alone. If this lecture has stirred questions, share them, discuss them, and explore them further with those willing to think deeply. If you find value in this journey, remain connected for what is to come, because understanding cultural compliance is only the beginning of uncovering the hidden forces that shape human behavior.